Hola, soy Gabriela Cámara y este podcast es parte de la celebración del 25 aniversario de Contramar. Espero que lo disfruten tanto como yo he disfrutado platicar con tanta gente tan maravillosa. We're here with Emma Rosenbush. Emma Rosenbush is one of the most extraordinary people I've ever met, who I love the most in the entire world. But I want to talk to you, Emma, about welcome, and it's so lovely to have you here. It is so extraordinary.
I'm so honored.
What a treat. And it's so great to have you in Mexico City after how many? I mean, not so, but like since before the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
October 2019. We filmed the masterclass.
Yes. What a long story. So this, we decided to begin these series of interviews or of conversations on the occasion of the 25th anniversary of Contramar, which is coming up this summer. And of course, knowing that you were going to be here, I mean, not even knowing that you were going to be here, I mean, you were always on that list of people that I wanted to talk to about this event coming up. And you and I didn't know each other when I opened Contramar, of course, but I want to talk. I want you to tell me, or I want you and I to talk about Contramar and how you arrived to Mexico City and how you knew Contramar before you knew me, and then our story and how relevant you have been for the development of what Contramar now is. So just tell us the story.
Well, first of all, congratulations. 25 years. It is really extraordinary. And having just had lunch at Contramar the last 2 days in a row, it is as delicious, if not more delicious, and still my most favorite experience of eating in a restaurant ever, of any place. And that was my first experience of Contramar in 2010. I came to Mexico City from the Bay Area, where I had been working for a nonprofit law firm, and came to Mexico City, and all I can describe it as is as like one door opened after the other. It was just the timing, the alignment.
I would love to hear about your experience in arriving to Mexico City. Like, how did you come to dedicate, like going from being in a law firm in the Bay Area to coming to Mexico City and opening a pop-up of American brunch in Colonia Escandon? I want that story.
Well, in Berkeley, where I was living at the time, I had graduated from school in California, and I had this amazing job working at this prisoners' rights law firm. But I was like too young to be at a desk. Like, I did it for 2 years, and I couldn't do it. And I had just always fantasized about Mexico City. I had studied art history, and I loved the art. And I don't know, I had this thing, like I needed to go. And I saved up my money. Actually, I figured out this way to come and live outside of Cuernavaca with this curandera. And I was going to do this exchange. And I got there, and it was like a disaster. I'll just leave it at that. It just did not work. And I went to Mexico City, and then it's just one thing, like one door opened after the other. But really the best way I can describe it is the energy in Mexico City in 2010. I mean, I'm sure it still exists in its own way now, but I can't speak to it now, not being here. But then it was this like palpable energy of young people. Like, if there was a will, there was a way. You didn't need money to, do things. And I just was meeting all of these young Mexicans who were like architects starting their own firm, artists, they were starting their zines, like clothing companies. Like, it was just, I remember going to Pechacucha. You remember that?
Yes.
Okay. It was like in the basement of, or in the back of, oh my gosh.
I always
go
used to
there
give
all
the food
time.
for Pechacucha.
Okay. But what was at the
Torre
cantina?
Latinoamericana. Oh, la Covadonga.
At the Covadonga.
Yeah, that's where they started.
I went to a Pechacucha, which was this like salon, like a forum. And it blew my mind.
Jorge Munguia began that.
Jorge Munguia and
Glora Romo.
And I like sat in the back and I was like, this little gringa.
How did you know how to go to Pechacucha?
I basically re-met Nikki Nakazawa. She and we had friends in common. She went to school in Chicago with one of my best friends, two of my best friends. So I had met Nikki one summer in Chicago, and years later, I hear she's living in Mexico City. I fled my Cuernavaca exchange where I was supposed to be like teaching English in exchange for learning from this curandera. But actually, I just cleaned her house like the whole time, and it was bad. And I left and I came to Mexico City and connected with Nikki. And Nikki Nikki Nakazawa, she knew everyone. And through her, I met Jorge Munguia and did a little work with him. And I just was here traveling. Oh, well, I had a boyfriend at the time. We had broken up. But interestingly, he was American, but his mother had moved to Mexico City. So actually, I broke up with this boyfriend who I loved. Like I had this broken heart, and I lived with his mom, who's still a very dear friend of mine.
Yes, I know.
And then I connected with Nikki, and I just started going out and through Nikki meeting these extraordinary young people. And it was so inspiring. Like that's the only way I can put it. It was just people were making shit happen. And it was just cool.
Maybe you didn't need capital, but it was just reasonable quantities of capital or achievable quantities.
Yes. And like the energy of the hustle, and I grew up in New York City, and it also reminded me of the feeling of growing up in New York that I also felt had become a little, not like bland, but just different. Like there was just like, again, that momentum and that sort of drive and the energy. And it really, I loved it. And Jim, that was later, but yes, Jim, Fiddler's Green Farm, so amazing. Anyway, and so that was like in part of my mind. And being with Nikki, we're walking through the centro. And of course, there was this Mercado El Cien, which I had learned this very cool Gabriela Cámara had like helped to start. And it was like one sort of, obviously there are so many markets, but the whole point was that it was organic and local, and it all came from within 100 kilometers. And so Nikki and I were walking, and we were talking about the produce. And there was this interesting, on one hand, you're so flooded with like the fresh produce in Mexico City, but also there wasn't that sort of advertising and connection being made where at the time, particularly in the Bay Area, you couldn't go to a restaurant without it sort of being shoved in your face, like where your greens were coming from. Like there was like such that connection being made, where here it was here and present, but also not really being highlighted. I totally did the whole commercial and never got paid for it. Whatever. There was just like so many different things, but it was this moment of like freedom. And arriving in the city in 2010, aside from the energy, it was just so beautiful. Like it just blew my mind, the architecture, the mashup of it, right? Like the old with the new, and this like, and the thing that people didn't realize, like, or my, friends in the US, my family, is how green Mexico City was. It's like you get here and the trees and like the plants, and it was just delicious, just on every level. And I fell in love with it. And again, like these doors that kept opening. It was like, okay, we had this idea, and oh my gosh, we need a chef. And oh, here's Kenny, who went to school with Nikki's sister. And then we need a space. And oh, this like fonda around the corner from where Nikki and I lived, they, were closed on the weekends, of course, because they just did their comida corrida Monday through Friday. So we decided like maybe we could rent this fonda, and we rent it for like was like 200 pesos. And we, did our first pop-up. The kitchen was like actually it was kind of, and Kenny and Nikki also, who, we all discussed the menu together, and it was all based on the ingredients that we could get. But Kenny also had, we had this vision, and with Kenny's expertise in cooking, like we did these like eggs Benedict and French toast and like things that were so kind of classic. But then with this, I didn't go out to restaurants, except I will get to Contramar. We would like save my pesos to go there. But that's, basically how it sort of happened. And then it was just this really amazing, fun time where we didn't know if we were trying to make something permanent or not. It turned into this restaurante itinerante, and we connected with Billy and Ro and these friends that had this little burgeoning architecture studio, and they had a space in San Miguel de Chapultepec, which at the time was Cafezena. And they had designed it with this one long table, right? This like, it fit 30 people. It was this concrete, like sort of like the worst acoustics you could imagine for a restaurant in a way. It was just like all concrete.
It's Billy style.
And all open, and this teeny tiny kitchen, but it was perfect. And they kind of gave it to us of like, you guys can do it here every weekend instead of like rotating at the Fonda. And then next door to that, there was this space that Billy, they took over, and we ended up creating this thing, Comida Revistas, CBR. And it was this high-low concept of a bodega where, we had these like beautiful magazines and then Doritos and like everything in between. So
only Sunday.
And then we did some evening events, like a few dinners.
Maybe brunch was only one day.
Yeah, I think it was Sunday.
Yeah.
And I just remember like we would, the prep, it was so much work that would go into it. And, again, like I was not, I learned Spanish in school, but really it was from being here and living here. And I will say that's one thing that, there wasn't a chance to come here and only speak English. Like there wasn't this condesa of people speaking English everywhere. I was really forced to learn Spanish, which was part of why, I was so wanting to move here and, develop that. And then to like run the business and speak to clientes in Spanish. And I was so aware that I spoke like a niña, but it kind of didn't matter. And the food was delicious. And we would like, I just remember we would set up and we played like over and over. We were obsessed with Lana Del Rey and Fleetwood Mac. And like, that's how we would get prepped. And then we would have this long day, and just that feeling at the end of this long, of this amazing day of service, and we would eat the leftovers and we would sit down together and we would like talk through it. And it was amazing. And that is ultimately how it connected me to you, because I was thinking about this morning. We met Yair, and Yair was like, you guys need to meet
my partner, Gabriela.
You need to meet Gabriela.
I remember
he had a hand in Mercado del Cien.
He told me about you guys. Like these Americans, they're starting to buy in Xochimilco. Yes, I wanted to make it for you, but there's no sea urchin. The sea urchin wasn't good. We could get it frozen, but yeah.
But Xochimilco, that was another huge thing. In Pichon, we met Lucio, who had Antonio, who had Yolcan at the time, or they were just starting it. And we did help like with this fundraiser of the chinampas. Anyway, it was just like, again, just going back to, there was so much happening at that time, as I know there is still, but it really was a moment of like real momentum. It felt in the city. It was just so palpable and possible. It just felt like everything, it felt so possible. And, we used to joke, like here we were doing this reverse, like we were these three immigrants like running a deli and, in Mexico. And anyway, of course we know about you and Contramar. Contramar was like, it was the spot to, when I did save up and go. And I just remember, when my like family would come and we go out to lunch, and I remember I think it's more important that I explain my first time in Contramar working there, because that really is when I had the most, when I really understood, and it had this like more profound effect on me. But eating there was just, it was so enjoyable. Like it was just so fun, and you felt, special to like be there. And obviously the food was amazing, but it was really the vibe and the experience. And yeah, it was like to sit there and enjoy this long meal. I mean, it was so un-American. It's kind of like the best way I can put it. And I fast forward to meeting you at that film. There was this film screening, and I don't even remember why I went, but you were.
It was a film about El Bully. And yes. I was one of the.
You were on the panel.
Uh-huh.
Okay, and at the end, I like fangirled and went up to you, or maybe Ayer was there and like introduced us or something.
No. There was nobody. It was at Cine Tonalá.
It was at Cine Tonalá, which was so cool. And
it still is. It still exists.
And you were so like gracious and kind. And I think I told you my like embarrassing that I thought you were the Alice Waters of Mexico City. Which you like never let me live down. But it was there that you were like, oh yes, I've heard of Pichon, and when's like, I'm coming. And I thought, well, I'll be there next weekend with my family. And I thought, yeah, right. It was like one of the biggest things that I had learned living here was that, with all due respect, like the kind of like, oh yeah, like te invito. Like it was like, of course, like come whenever you want, or like this, yes, let's get together. You should come to my house. And then like nobody would ever follow through. And I was like always heartbroken. Like I didn't understand. It took me a while to understand, like culturally, that's just kind of like what you say. And like nobody actually, like you don't actually go to their house for lunch, or at least I didn't as an American. So I was like, okay, yeah, Gabriela Cámara, sure, she's going to come to the brunch. Yeah, right. And you showed up that next weekend, and you showed up with Lucas and Pablo, and Lucas was 3 or 2, and he was so cute. And you guys came at the very end, and I remember we were like out of everything, and I remember going to the kitchen and being like she's here, she came. And like thought like, I remember Kenny scrambling and Nikki in the kitchen, and I think you guys had like, I don't even know if what you ate was any good. And what you and I connected on really early was like how cool, like San Francisco was cool because basically of the hippies that like had moved there and made it cool, right? And that
we had a nostalgia for a time we didn't live.
Right. And like the fact that we like our favorite people were 60, 70 plus. And they all attended and were members of the opera and the symphony and the SF Jazz, which happened to open like across the street from where we ended up finding a space for Cala. So you had in the city these like very cool but older people who, anyway, just the point being that the idea for the restaurant was like, where would we find a space that was going to, again, appeal to like the masses, right? Like not just do some trendy thing in the Mission, which was what was happening at the time. Mm-hmm. Not just go to the dog patch, which people were really investing in because of tech and like there was like new development there. But we were looking at spaces and really,
you were really getting the pulse of the city.
Yeah, and it was like these new soulless spaces that, I mean, it was cool. It was like a year of rent free, obviously building it out, which was 2+ years, but really to like go back to our Contramar, our focal point, it was when you brought me to Mexico City to train at Contramar that I feel like I really, obviously we were talking about the vision for Cala, and we knew it was like this sister to Contramar, but it was the experience of, I mean, I will just say the first day that I went to train there, they gave me the like polo shirt that they used to wear, these like blue polo shirts. It was like a XL. It might have been like a double XL. And I was going to train at the door with Mao, the manager. And he said, no, you're going to go stand in the corner in the kitchen.
And you're just
And
gonna
I was
observe.
like, okay. And I was like, for how long? He said, all day, the whole service. And for 6 hours, I mean, they like fed me some tostadas and I was delighted. But I stood in the corner and he told me to just watch the dining room. Anyway.
That's the secret of perfect service. You don't notice
Yeah,
it.
Exactly. Exactly. And it was watching this choreography. And you're right, as like a guest, you don't even know how your next move is being anticipated, like before you even know you need something. And then I worked there, mostly at the door for like a month, and really was learning and being indoctrinated by the Contramar Kool-Aid of like this level of hospitality that
you certainly drank it.
I drank it and slurped it up. No, it just really, and then the question was like, how do we translate this to a different culture, to a different city, country? I mean, we had our work cut out. But to me,
to have you in this dialogue, I mean, to have you be a part of, like, I can't think of Cala without you. And I can think of Cala, of course, with so many people. I mean, without so many people, we would not have been able to make Cala. But you, of course, have been my closest not even like my closest person. But anyway, I mean, you really were instrumental because you started working as my assistant. But then this dialogue of how to translate Contramar, which made my work so much more relevant in so many ways. Like I really feel that moving to San Francisco was a complete leap, and it really catapulted my professional life in a way that I didn't even know or expect. But Contramar was sort of a sequence of coincidence, like one thing happened after the other, as you say, like doors open, it became a relevant place, kind of basically because I've always been very lucky, but also because I've always worked hard, and it was always like go, 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 go. And it was great. And I opened other restaurants, and then I closed other restaurants, and I always knew what I wanted to do and what I didn't want to do, but I never had to think about it the way I had to think about it when we opened Cala. So that was really important to have you in that dialogue, like to have you as that like soundboard was really extraordinary. It really, really was so fortunate. And it was and I know the best thing was that you thought it was fortunate for you, and I thought it was fortunate for me.
So, okay, I think we can't end this. I mean, not that we're ending, but like we have to talk about
Cala.
But specifically, like
our hiring.
Yes, because that was
the really relevant factor.
And that was, again, what was the connection to Contramar. It was like, okay, how do you... In 2015,
I was mortified of the service in San Francisco and those great restaurants that we would go to. But like great food. No, but the service was so unlike Contramar, or unlike what I thought.
I think a big thing that we quickly realized was, at Contramar in particular, like one of the reasons why the service is so amazing is because of the pride. Okay. But I just think that's important because that was always such a big, it's like, it was always, and that's what I learned from you. It's like the food obviously has to be impeccable because that was like, that's not even like sort of like a part of the equation that is up for, right. But that's just one part of the entire experience. I mean, coming down to like that first, when you walk in the door, like what is your initial, how are you
greeted?
Yeah. And how do you feel the moment you walk into the space? Yep. Sets the tone for this entire experience you're about to have.
I was certain we couldn't only hire illegal workers. We couldn't only hire professionals. So, Emma Rosenbush, tell your story, because I love how everybody thought you were crazy, and I was completely on board from the moment I heard it.
You were. I mean,
with your previous experience.
With my previous experience, right, when I had worked in the prison, I worked for the prison law office as prisoners' rights advocacy. And it was such important work, but also so depressing, right? I mean, at the time, California in particular was at like a 200% maximum capacity in state prisons. It was horrific. And a big part of that was because the recidivism rate in California was so high.
But recidivism in the world is in the prison system is super high, as we have learned.
And in California, they were sending people back to prison due to like infractions on parole, like just real ridiculous reasons to be warehousing people, whatever. We don't need to have that conversation. But point being that at the time, it was really clear to me that, I mean, it was just all about that opportunity of work. I mean, if you can't work, like what, not only for the obvious reasons of survival and support, but like actually being a part of something, right? And like having, like worth and
like a real chance to redo your life, because otherwise you're just doomed to that old path forever.
And like the social contract is like, okay, whatever happened or you did, like you've served your time. What's supposed to happen is like that's what prison is for, and then you should be allowed to have, a second chance. And as we know, that's just not how it goes. And so having this hiring crunch in the city at the time, which really was, for many reasons, exactly. The city was really expensive. You also had amazing restaurants across the bay, which hadn't always been the case. And so professional servers, there was just such a demand. Like why would you take the train into San Francisco if you could live and work in Oakland and, work at these amazing restaurants? So there was really a shortage. And at the same time, because of the previous work, I was aware that there were so many people who were capable humans that were not being given a chance to get back into the workforce. And that was really this idea of like...
Yeah, and you knew that there was this big chunk of the population that needed a job, wasn't getting a job, and hence there was that issue to be solved. And then here we had our restaurant, or the possibility of a restaurant, and we didn't have the clarity of where to find people who would actually appreciate the job we could offer.
And then
so
specifically,
you put those two together.
Yes.
I mean, we did, but it was your idea because you knew about this issue in San Francisco. And then also you knew about all these city organizations and government organizations, or
and I started to learn
organizations that were actually supporting prisoners or people who had been convicted or who had been...
But also really important to just go back to, again, like the pride at Contramar, because it wasn't just the job. It was about being a part of something and creating, and also this opportunity to sort of like flip fine dining on its head. It's like, it's 2023 and it's sort of shocking. It's not sort of. It is shocking that it still looks the way it is, right? Like front of house
more than ever. I think more than ever.
White,
more than ever,
male,
it is a disaster.
Right. We know this, and we knew this then. And this idea that like you could, first of all, there's the financial mobility piece where front of house, historically makes more money because of tips, which that's a whole separate conversation. But what I knew from Contramar and what you had created, it's not like in Mexico City, there's some, like, obviously class is a huge issue in this country and this city. But what was so apparent and is so apparent when you go to Contramar is, again, that sense of pride. And I think it comes in large part from the contract that they have, where there's real sense of not just purpose, but compensation, right?
Yeah,
like, and it's
in really like deeply important and material ways, their life does improve. It is a really good job.
And in the United States, where serving and working in restaurants, has always been like, it's what you do on your way to something else, or it's just, so it's always been a place of misfits or whatever. It's just, it's
artists on their
it's not, we don't
side hustle.
Yeah. And we don't like, there's not that European thing where you're like a server for life and it's like a point of pride, the opposite.
Right.
And
because you would have social, like insurance and schooling and all these
Right.
benefits that in the United States you don't
No,
have.
you're exploited and you're not paid well, and you definitely didn't have benefits and whatever, all of the things that have been a part of working in the hospitality industry. And so again, this opportunity of marrying this, like, people who want to work, need a job, have been overlooked, and like, how do we, like, it's an opportunity for us to teach, you know, again, because it's an art form. Like, that's what we used to talk about, the art of service. It's not just like learning a menu and, you know, throwing down plates. Like, people who work in restaurants and are good at it, it's like such an extraordinary skill. And it's an art, and it's something that we haven't appreciated, certainly not in the US. And it was bringing all of that together, and with the right people, this opportunity. And then, as you say, like, connecting with, really, it started with the probation department in San Francisco. So we started basically hiring in the probation department, you know, with these different community partners that we made.
It's difficult. Like, I feel like people are very aware of the food, or the issues around food and serving food and growing food, and still nobody had thought about that. And I have to say that, you know, fast forward, this was 2014. We opened Cala in 2015. We had to close Cala in 2019. No, 2020 because of the pandemic, and we didn't reopen. And that's it. And now we know that Cala is resting in peace. And we have learned so much from Cala, and we have turned it over and flipped it as in however many ways. And it really has been the best experience of our lives in so many ways, even though it has been the worst also. But we are here, Emma, and you and I always stuck together. You and I knew from, like, you and I developed this codependency, or this dependency, or this, just like, we have this pact, like, since we met, we, like, have been so close, and it's been such a joy and the most important support ever. It wasn't like I grew up going to restaurants, or I trained in a restaurant. I had never worked in a restaurant until I opened one. Never.
So
never.
Bananas.
But I just did a restaurant with what I thought a restaurant should be done, or I wanted the food that I thought we should eat in restaurants, and I wanted the service that I thought was right. And the same was for Cala. I mean, of course, I had so much more experience. I had opened so many more restaurants in Mexico City, and I had that experience in Spain for that summer in Zaragoza. Like, I knew so much more.
I had worked in restaurants since I was 15, but never, you know, again, in like the old way, you know, and it needs to be mentioned that it wasn't just the hiring practice that did, I will say, it was successful. Like, we had this, you know, extraordinary teams over the years of people. And yes, there were many, you know, issues along the way. Yes. But, you know, we didn't do tips. We did full benefits.
No,
like,
that was our thing. It was an integral.
Combined. Yes.
It wasn't hiring people with a conviction history. It was
that
an
piece
issue.
Is so amazing.
Yes,
it
was an issue.
Tips are so, like, sexist and misogynistic. I mean, misogynistic and racist and all the things. Yes.
And we did something that responded to a need of the industry, or to a condition of the industry. And we just solved it in a way that we thought was possible and hopefully better.
And really with the intention that simply when you came and ate at Cala, that you felt
comfortable. We had learned how to make people feel in Contramar.
Exactly.
I knew that putting this out would avoid that. Because when you say you're going to cry, then you don't cry, which is what happened with Carlos Pellicer yesterday.
Thank
so
you.
Good. I love you so much.
I love you too.